found a magic trick for monetizing development and creating an awesome product.
So there's this road going into Hollywood, backed up bumper to bumper, and everybody's got a screenplay in their hand. And then there's this tram that nobody's on that just goes right underneath the whole highway straight into Hollywood.
Do you read the comments?
Reading the reviews and being concerned about what people think about your work. Not just saying this, but I don't give a shit.
Hey everyone, Drew from Moonshine Post coming to you from a vibrant city of Atlanta. At Moonshine, we're all about storytelling, collaboration, bringing visions to life, whether it's for the creative agencies, the big studios, or passionate indies. So come tell your story with us. Today on the show, we have Dan Bush, writer and director of feature films known for his work on The Signal, the reconstruction of William Zero, Dark Red, and The Vault. Recently, he had success in the emerging medium of pod fiction with narrative podcasts such as iHeartMedia's Tomorrow's Monsters and Blumhouse Television's The Manawak Caves. He's joined me for a fascinating conversation on creativity, motivation, and his general philosophy of storytelling. So let's get into the show.
I will say this because you probably need it,
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me to this.
I'm excited. This is special. I get to talk to people I really enjoy spending time with, who are actually my friends as well. All right, so Dan Bush, so excited to have you here. It's 2006. I just moved to Atlanta. There's an extreme amount of energy going on this movie called The Signal. This is a Sundance breakout film for directors in the indie scene of Atlanta. Everyone thinks I go to Sundance and now I have a career, but that's not exactly what happened.
No.
But you did go on to make 4 beautiful feature films that I got to see.
Yeah, it's funny because the expectation going into Sundance and getting the accolades and having your film picked up by Magnolia and then released in theaters, Mark Cuban's bought your movie. Like at the time when Sundance was doing a lot of business and people were buying movies for millions and millions of dollars at Sundance, and it could set up a career, it could set up a whole lifetime of, if nothing else, it could set you on the path towards a myriad of TV directing or wearing it just kind of gets you, it's your break in, right? Mm-hmm. We had the disadvantage of it happening right around the movie came out at Sundance in, I think it was 2007, and then the next year, right when we were done with Sundance, and everybody's like, "Oh man, you're going to be able to go and get like $30 million to make your next movie. Like you're set up for that, and you're primed for it." Well, right then, all the money dropped out because it was 2008, and there was this crash, and so mostly before that, it was a lot of real estate money, I think, that was going into independent films and people that had enough money that they were like taking chances. So there was nobody willing to take a risk anymore, and everybody was losing their ass. So all of the easy money that was ever put up for low budget films was gone, right? So I pivoted and I went to Hollywood and I walked into William Morris Endeavor at the time, and I had several screenplays that I had sculpted over the years. And I literally brought them in there and I was like, here, and I spread them out on the table and I was like, here's what I got. I was trying to be ready for the moment when, if The Signal did well, I could jump on that moment. I could be prepared for it. So I had gotten my scripts into shape well enough to go, here's the 5 or 6 scripts, 3 in which I'm particularly interested in. And it set me on this interesting path where I would spend a decade or so trying to get these movies made at a higher budget level with major attachments. We had Bradley Cooper attached, we had Mila Jovovich attached, we had, different levels of people participating in these movies, and we still couldn't get them to go for whatever reasons. Either it would be some weird scheduling conflict, or the people we would start to work with would want the scripts to be so dramatically different, and so that you would just kind of lose all signature. It would lose all, it would just become an uninteresting movie, and you can't make your next movie after one that's kind of got you some indie cred, just some blanket movie. It's really important what you come out with after that. There's a myriad of reasons why we couldn't get these movies going, but whenever they were stuck in what I call development hell, mm-hmm. I would just go make another movie.
Yeah, I remember
with no money,
Well, that's I remember these conversations happening because I was fortunate enough to be in this film co-op with you guys. But I was the youngest, and it was almost like listening to the parents talk in the other room, the adults are talking and arguing about, well, I can't get Bradley Cooper for this thing, or I can't do this thing. It's like, why? I remember you guys raging. I'm like, why can't we get these movies off? It was all the directors, and it really was in the other room, and the adults were talking, and I just remember thinking, that's fascinating. And then you guys would come out of the room all flustered and say, let's go make a movie.
Right.
And I'd be like, okay, let's go.
It was the only way to solve the psychological dilemma of going, what is wrong? What's not happening? Why does God hate me? What's not happening here that I'm not able to manifest? And why haven't I broken in on such a level that I am financially secure as well as artistically secure? And the only answer to that is to make something. It's the only thing that stops all of the doubt and all of the concern and all of the worry is to actually get fascinated in a story. Not just to make a movie for a movie's sake, but to get fascinated in a character and try your best to and fall in love with them and try your best to tell their story, right? That's the only solution I can think of to the madness of development hell in Hollywood.
Losing yourself to your passion is the antidote.
It is. Yeah, it's the only one.
I love that you did against the odds and in the struggle of making the next big version of what you wanted to make, you still went and made the other films. Mm-hmm. You made movies. You continued to direct feature films. Yeah. Your themes, which is, I enjoy watching your movies. I can say I'm a fan, not just as your friend. You're constantly exploring, from what I've seen, humanity through sci-fi, the impact of tech on humanity, and these deep psychological dives into the understanding of oneself. You're probing deeply into the human psyche. Your company is called Psychopia Pictures. Mm-hmm. Why do you gravitate towards that to explore those human complexities?
I mean, so all stories have to do with a transformation at their root. I also studied anthropology while I was studying filmmaking in college because I was fascinated with cultural anthropology, and especially rites of passage I got very interested in, and what it is about the human consciousness that needs these induction points. All movies ultimately have to do with this idea of a rite of passage or crossing through some liminal state and into some transformation to something else. In fact, when I look at movies, there's a lot of movies that people love. You know, Paul Thomas Anderson makes these incredible movies. And some of them I look at and I'm like, did the character change? Is the character any different? Has the character transformed from what I saw at the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie? And sometimes the answer is absolutely not. In which case it makes me go, this is kind of more of a painting, isn't it? There's a lot of things that happen, but it's all this impressionistic sort of painting. There's not necessarily a transformation or transformative story. So all humans have to do this, whether you're in boot camp, and that's probably the closest thing to an initiation rite of passage that we have in our culture, because the bar mitzvah has lost its power over fracturing of the identity. And or you can, in our culture, to come of age, you get a driver's license, or you are able to drink, or you're able to, you get drafted, you're eligible for a draft. But we've lost the idea where in a lot of tribes or in a lot of more primal cultures, whether it's a vision quest and you are sent on your own with no food or water for 3 days and have to overcome certain obstacles and challenges, which are designed to break down your initial identity, and then to be received into something on the other side of that. So that's a huge part of the human condition that I feel like, especially in our culture and in modern Euro-Western culture, is sort of lost. And we lean more and more into our stories to remind us that is something that is important, where the childhood self is obliterated, and there's a liminal period where even in the Hopi culture, they'll cross-dress the children. They'll do all sorts of things to just, one, eliminate their dependence on the mother, completely isolate them, eliminate any of the stuff that had to do with them being a child. And then they go through this period where they are nothing. They're just they have no identity at all, and it's madness. And then on the other side of that, they are inducted. They've crossed through some other threshold, and they are taught the secrets of the tribe, and they are inducted in. And so this induction ceremony is really important. We've lost it. We don't have, our ceremonies don't have as much sort of psychological power to unite as they once did, I don't think, especially with fucking phones and stuff. And, so my movies are about that. They're about a transformation from one state of being to another state of being, from one state of consciousness to another state of consciousness, especially in lieu of any real thing like that being provided by the outside culture. So by default, these movies are also a criticism of the culture we're in, just by default, because we're showing a transformation that we don't normally have that we probably should. So sci-fi and horror are the places where you can put what it means to be a human being on steroids. They're forced to figure out all these, to have this catharsis in a much more like streamlined way.
Yeah.
I don't think any of that is born out of a need to like make a mindfuck movie with a twist ending. I think it's born out of a need to understand what we're all fighting against in the lack of any real induction. We all want to belong to something. We all are dying to be a part of something, and to belong, the human need to belong is more powerful than the need to survive or to preserve life. It's the most powerful human instinct. So all my movies are about trying to find a sense of belonging despite the lack of that.
You see story as a means of recreating this induction ceremony for civilization. That your stories rally around these induction ceremonies. And that's why story is important to Dan Bush.
And also to hold a mirror up to society. So if there's a lack of such belonging, a lack of such induction into a sense of belonging, if you don't have a sense of belonging, it's a form of madness.
Well, storytelling, according to you, is your humanity.
Yeah, it's nothing but. Of the pillars that hold up society, story is the oldest, deepest thing that is uniquely human. Because stories are cultural continuity. They're holding up a mirror to society. They're cultural critiques.
So you've recently transitioned from highly visual storytelling filmmaker, director, to podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't know.
Fiction podcast.
Yeah, pod fiction. And this crazy rise of pod fiction. Successfully, I might add. You've done 2 launched with iHeartMedia. But you crushed it with this first foray into pod fiction. That like Tomorrow's Monsters from but I mean, you linked up with iHeartMedia, and I don't know how the whole business side of marketing works. I mean, obviously I see it in film all the time. I understand how that works. It's
you're part of that last.
Yeah, exactly. I'm one of the circus guys.
You're the segue from the finished film to the marketing, right?
Come down this tunnel. Yeah. I'll show you another one. It's but I don't know what that world is like when you're releasing these things. You guys put this together, and not only was it like, oh, I'm just going to go have some fun with some A-listers, John Boyega, to say the least, which was wonderfully utilized in your pod fiction, by the way. But you smashed it. I don't actually know how that happened with you. Was that a long time getting into it? Something you'd already been interested in? Or is this like, I have to because it's 2020?
No, none of that. If you think about it, if going back to what we were talking about earlier about these obstructions.
Mm-hmm.
So for one, a lot of people are coming to me saying, "Hey, this is a fun way to tell stories. It's a different way of like comprehending stories, and you have a different attention span." And I was like, "No, I'm a filmmaker. Why would I do a fiction podcast?" So much of the way I tell stories is connected and rooted to camera and rooted to, how to set up a shot so you have information passing and telling a story in each individual shot with no dialogue at all. So I was like, why would I do that? I'm a filmmaker. And then I kind of thought about those obstructions, those challenges. And I thought, there's something here. I should probably take this challenge on. The obstruction being that I'm making a movie without a camera, right? So what does that even look like? And as I got involved with it, it was hard because I was the hardest part, honestly, was just the exposition.
I've listened to Tomorrow's Monsters, and thanks for sending me Manawak Caves. It's funny because it is invisible for me, and I know your visual storytelling already. Like I know that on camera, and I wanted to pay attention after just our pre-call of how did Dan navigate visual storytelling to audio storytelling without making me think like I'm holding my pencil and I'm contemplating how to write.
Yeah. Hand me the scalpel, right? Yeah. Like in a movie, you just show them grab the scalpel, right? So movies are all show, don't tell. And podcast is nothing but tell. There's no show, right? So on the logistics side, why did I switch to it? I was already switching to it as a matter of sort of a potential challenge and an interesting way to look at how to tell stories without having to go raise a shitload of money.
So it satisfied the itch of just storytelling out of the gate, so that you saw it as just another viable medium that you
and maybe one that could be as challenging as it was, could also potentially be liberating. And I'll get to that in a second. But secondly, it happened to be COVID. It happened to be that there were all these actors who were suddenly sitting in their houses, twiddling their thumbs, losing their minds, wanting to work, and I had access to them. Yeah, I was like, okay, I can still do this. If I can figure out how to record them from where they are, I can still do this. I don't have to sit on my thumbs or whatever, or writing another screenplay. I wasn't in the point of writing screenplays. I was at the point of like wanting to produce stuff. I wanted to do scene work. I wanted to work with actors. I needed to get into the production and the direction part at a point in time when nobody could. Not possible. Everything shut down. So I figured out a way to do it.
Pod fiction for you was the means to the ends of scratching the creative itch. You have to tell these stories or you're going to die.
Yes. And also there's an idea that these things, I mean, the people are investing, and I knew this, people are investing in story, in pod fiction because they're looking for new IP. Like just to mention, say, I've got IP, and people get really excited. They don't want to hear your screenplay. They don't care if you're walking around with 10 pilots in your backseat and you're driving around Hollywood. So there's this road that was going into Hollywood, this 405 that's backed up bumper to bumper, and everybody's got a screenplay in their hand, right? And then there's this tram that nobody's on that just goes right underneath the whole highway straight into Hollywood. And I found myself in rooms that were more meaningful and people that were more curious just because they were like, oh yeah, this is interesting, this is different. There's a universe here, right?
And not because I have an idea for a story, it's because I have a fully fleshed intellectual property that I've already succeeded with.
Have a universe, yeah. But also people are willing to put money into it because the idea is like, instead of, for the fraction of the cost of making a pilot, I can create an entire series, 13 episodes. I can get actors attached. I can get directors attached. I can attach all the talent. I can prove out story. I can develop a fan base, and I can pay for development. All of those boxes get checked by simply going, here, let's do a fiction podcast, right? As opposed to making a pilot of a TV show. So all the investors are doing this because they want this to go to TV. I mean, it has to stand on its own. It has to be, you're not just doing it as like a teaser reel for the TV show. It's not, the whole thing's not just a pitch. It has to be a viable thing that audiences love in and of itself, like a book, like a novel, anything else, right? You don't just write a novel so that you can someday hopefully make a movie of it. But yeah, those are some of the logistical things that I was thinking about when doing it.
Well, it seems to me that you found a magic trick for monetizing development and creating an awesome product that then also has an additional life. You still take the storytelling methods, your hyper obsession with character transformation and these webbing of themes into the pod fictions that I listened to. Mm-hmm. How did you navigate going from highly visual to strictly audio?
Well, I had to lean in. My first thought was that no matter how, and we said this earlier, but no matter how beautiful the movie is or how gorgeous the cinematography is, that's working on a certain level with your brain, and it's lovely. But as far as the action of a story, meaning the transformation of character, there's nothing that can ever compete with the audience's imagination. And the second thing is I found out about podcasts. People can't sit, like this BuzzFeed sort of like world we live in where they don't have enough bandwidth to read a news article, but they'll listen to a podcast for 5 hours.
Yeah, there's less friction.
What the hell's going on? And also your brain, like when you're listening to a podcast, you're not sitting in a room with headphones on with your eyes closed like you are when you watch a movie with the lights out, just focused on that. You're doing the dishes, you're jogging, you're driving, you're doing all these other things. So it's functioning in the background in a way that's playing on your brain that literally lights up different parts of your brain than when you're watching a movie. It's a completely different sort of intake neurologically. So I thought if I can hold them to listen to a story for as long as I want, and people tell me they pull up when they get home from the commute and they sit in their car for an extra 10 minutes just to keep listening. Yeah, like, that's powerful shit. Well,
the ceremony of film is I go into the quiet box and I passively get told, I take in the information and I'm told what to see and what to hear.
Yeah.
and I did the thing you told me to do, and I got to take Manawa Caves, and I'm immersed.
Your brain is much more active if you're listening to these.
But I'm also doing things like you said. I'm not in the quiet box. I am walking around tidying up after the kid, but I get to plug in and I get to plug out, which is kind of cool. For me, it is a different way of taking story, but I listen to podcasts for news and also just to learn. But yours was my first. I mean, I guess I'd listened to radio dramas before, but like yours was my first pod fiction of this rise of pod fiction. Right. And I just wanted to know, like, can I be immersed? And sure enough, it was halfway between, for me at least, reading a book and watching a movie. But my brain, with the binaural between both ears, I'm not sitting in my room, like in my podcast chair, like, oh man, this is great.
But you might be turning around because you heard some shit behind you.
I am freaked out by the experience I have in Manawag because of the binaural situation you've put together. Right. And that was, by the way, thanks for the warning. It is brutal. But
very triggering for a lot of.
But I did lose myself in the way that I would, in a way that takes me a while when I'm reading. You know, it'll take me about 30 minutes to tunnel in and hit my zone, but I can drop in these pod fictions. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, okay. I see what Dan could do now, and I couldn't find the artifice of the hand me that scalpel.
Yeah.
I did look.
It's there.
It can be, but I forgive it just in the same way that I forgive some of the artifice in the film world.
A couple of things, like a lot of producers that are now reaching out to me to do these, and they have these arbitrary rules of like, we don't want any voiceover. No voiceover. And so like, that's how I did it. I did it with, that's how I made it invisible, was with voiceover, because I was going, okay, this isn't a movie. It's not an audio book, but it's somewhere in between. It's not theater, but it's theatrical. It's got all of these elements, right? And what was liberating in the writing for me was going, oh, I can get literary with the voiceover. Like in a movie, if you use voiceover, and people think it's a crutch, voiceover, you know, that Robert McKee thing of like, God help you if you use voiceover. And I'm like, no, you're fucking wrong. My favorite movies are voiceover movies.
Yeah, my top 5.
Like from Taxi Driver, Apocalypse Now, American Beauty, Fight Club. Like they're all, my favorite movies are voiceover movies. So I'm like, that's nonsense. I love those. And it allows this sort of literary aspect to the work to where you can get into a deeper psychological state. That's why people are like, I like the book, I didn't like the movie. Because they're missing that deep psychological dive, right?
It's a crutch for storytellers that aren't yet good at telling story. So it's a throwaway thing, but you can use it.
Yeah, but in this case, I leaned all the way into it because I wanted to go into a deep dive on when we were setting up the edit on these. It's like, and even in the writing, it's like there's in-world Julian talking in Manawak Caves, in-world, there's archival, and then there's psychological
introspection.
So the VO isn't just like they might be starting off talking into his tape recorder, and then we let all the sounds drift away from the world, the in-world, and he ends up in this void, and then these impressionistic things start to filter in, these sound effects and sound design start to filter in to match his psychological state as he's reviewing his memory of this stuff. And we get immersed into like this weird psychological space that's lost in, it's nowhere specific. But I found that to be my favorite thing about the writing of this, because I get to go on a deep dive on the psychological perspective in a Faulkner kind of way that you can't do with a movie, right?
Yeah. My favorite thing was the ability to drift between the 3 states of self-talk of, what I'm talking about, we're talking, and I am introspective and paranoid and stuck in my own brain within one character.
These shifting perspectives of reality,
It's wonderfully done. It was highly challenging.
I think that was the strength of the podcast. Is like you have access to that. You can do it with film. It's just different. This is just more literary.
Well, by this thing jacking into my brain and straight in through my ears, and my brain filling in the gaps with imagination and creating the visuals, you did confront me through these induction ceremonies you're talking about. I was forced into these moments of catharsis. Like I don't have a choice. I can't close my eyes. I can't, I'm stuck with it even when I turn it off. And I had It's a really fun way to watch, actually, to become and drop into the struggle. I don't even know how to explain that, but yeah, it was haunting.
We put the disclaimer at the top, like this may be triggering for some people. There's, there are representations of sexual assault, there are representations of bullying, there are representations of all this stuff. And I have that in my movies too, like when I'm torturing my protagonist in a movie and having them get stripped of all of their ego. That's all by design. And a lot of times people point at my movies and go, that's unnecessarily violent. There's spectacle there and it feels gratuitous. I get that criticism sometimes. And some people couldn't listen to this podcast. They got up to that point in the podcast and about seeing episode 3 or 4, and they're like, I can't listen to this. And, like Irreversible, I had trouble watching that movie.
Yeah.
But I had to watch it because I had to go, what is the point of me? What is the filmmaker wanting me to experience here? So that when we get to the light bath at the end, what has he done to my soul? And so the audio has a way of doing that with you too. And so when people are like turned off, they're like, you didn't have to go there. I couldn't listen to it. And I'm like, I know movies aren't just entertaining. Stories aren't just entertaining. They actually serve another purpose. If you can stick with it to the end, there will be a payoff. Yeah, you are going to have some ego death yourself. You're going to have to face some stuff yourself. And it's scary.
I suspended my disbelief. I knew what I was in for after you gave me the disclaimer. I did experience it. I was confronted. You turned me into a believer. I didn't even partake in pod fiction until
Oh yeah.
The rise of pod fiction. You're a part of that.
Right.
And you transferred into a new medium and were highly successful. How do you view that success as a storyteller, switching from one medium to the other? Is that where you're going to stay? Is this the thing for you? Or are you going to tunnel back out with IP?
Yeah, it's the transmedia. That's what that is.
The world building.
So if you're building character and you're building story and you're building these universes wherein you can take people on this cathartic journey, the opportunity or the entry point for the audience doesn't have to just be a movie or just be an audio podcast or a book or a graphic novel. It can, and in many cases should be, all of those things. All of these different cool expressions. I mean, you think about Star Wars, from Andor to like whatever, animated kids version of Star Wars exists. There's all these different sort of access points to that universe, right? And in fact, I think that they should have some 3D chess involved with the story, so that like maybe if you listen to the podcast before you see the TV version of Man in Walk Caves, you'll glean certain insights that will inform the things that are happening. Not that you'll already know what's going to happen because you watch the podcast, but because you're watching, you're watching a parallel story, but something that you heard in the podcast is informing some clue in the other one, so that there's this crossover in your participation with this universe. This was liberating. It gave me a chance to get out of the box of the indie feature film world that I lived in order to access a different thing that is back to that cathartic, transformational, story about the need to belong.
So not only did you switch mediums, but obviously you're highly successful in doing it, but that's not the end game. You're the storyteller. You're going to create these IPs, and you will probably take them into the visual medium again, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah. I mean, as in love as I am, in fact, that's going to be a challenge, right? To get some of the thing. I mean, we're going to lose some of these literary, psychological spaces by going. They'll be expressed in a very different way, in a way I'm much more, schooled in and familiar with, and is deeper entrenched in my soul, is how to tell it with the camera, how to use images, juxtaposed to inhabit a similar effect.
Yeah, your Shakespearean aside and soliloquy is going to have to find another way back into your visual format.
Exactly. You say success, and my first thought is define success. Is it monetary success? Is it critical acclaim? Is it fan base?
What is your metrics of success?
My metrics of success now, I used to be a lot more sensitive to like critical reviews and so forth. I've started to enjoy user reviews more.
Tell me about the experience you had in my story. Let's start a conversation. Do you read the comments?
I was, especially in this case, because they were all, 99% like 5-star positive. This is a killer podcast. We love this.
Well, that and the millions of downloads chart success for me, Dan.
Just to be completely honest, I mean, that feels fucking great. Like, it's great.
Of course it does.
It's great just to be like, oh, okay, so my stories are meaningful and people can connect.
But to get a story down, like to relieve that creative pressure, to get a story down and get it out there, like allows you to do the next one.
Yeah.
And then you create this momentum, right? And so that you're taking this momentum now, this late career momentum, and you're about to go ape shit back into both mediums. It looks like.
I guess one answer to your question is like, if I was 20 years ago, if this was like The Signal and it had that much impact or something, I think I would be losing my mind and I would be confused by it and stuff. But I've been through so many almosts, and I've been through so many rejections, and I've been through so many things that went, but maybe just didn't find the right audience, or found the right audience, but it was art house or whatever. Like, there's a million iterations of what I've been trying to do of like, let me experiment with this. And I feel like I've gotten to a point now where I'm not as concerned with that shit. Honestly, like, that's something that has reading the reviews and being concerned about what people think about your work is something that you can't escape. Not just saying this, but I literally am like, I don't give a shit. I really do not give a shit. I'm more excited about the people who do connect with it and identify with it. That's a conversation that I want to continue to have. In the reviews and the people who don't like it, great, cool. You don't like the podcast. It's not for everybody. It's not a big deal. I don't know why you had to like put a review in there if you didn't like it. But I'm not thinking about them when I go to the next story. I'm thinking, wow, this worked, this worked, this worked. I feel like I have another tool in my tool belt in order to do that cathartic thing, to do the storytelling. I can do more storytelling.
Well, I'm pumped. I'm pumped for you. I can't wait to see these properties that I already love in one form. I can't wait to see them in another form if that's what happens. But more importantly, I can't wait to hear the next part of the story if you're going to continue some of these.
Thanks, man. It's funny because I'm in a little bubble and I'm not thinking about these things. And so for you to come to me and say, I want to talk to you because I like the way where your head's at around story and your development as an artist. I'm like, oh, really?
So at night, when you put your kids to bed, what is story time like at the Bush house?
Oh, that's fun.
So there you have Dan Bush. I've known Dan for many years now, and while I'm impressed by his ability to shift from film into pod fiction and back again, I'm even more impressed by his tenacity as a storyteller, and I hope you are too. You can find Dan on Instagram at Psychopia and online at psychopiapictures.com. Until next time, keep sharp, keep friendly, and keep creating. Moonshine out.